due to you being muted, we did not hear your question. I believe it had to deal with the ESSA. So would you go ahead and, the floor is yours, Dr. Richardson.
All right, yes, I wanted to ask Mrs. Martin 2 questions.
Here she is.
Okay, yes, thank you. And thanks to IT for getting my microphone working.
They're very happy to help.
Thank you. Okay, the first question, Mrs. Martin, I know that the ACAP is scheduled to be administered in the spring. And I was wondering if what we used to know as the standards, I think they're now known as performance level descriptors or achievement level data, if that information was sent out to systems so that they will have an idea of the information on which students will be assessed.
Yes, ma'am. That information was sent out to them.
Okay. My second question, I just wanted to clarify, I thought you say, and I know it's going to determine on approval from the new administration, but that in the ESSA plan, a request was made. We know that with COVID being so prevalent, that our participation level might indeed be down. We know that that's one of the areas on which we are, assessed. Did I hear you say in the plan there is a request for a waiver in reference to our participation level with our students on the ACAP?
The request for the actual waiver is not in the plan, but we put
No,
verbiage in it.
not the request for the waiver, but that if we needed one, we would request it. Is that what I understood?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We have information that we want to compare that data to be able to show the impact. And then if that does show an impact where it's dropping the letter grade, based on the guidelines that are there, we will then submit a waiver to the feds to discuss waiving that from the calculation of our academic achievement indicator.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my 2 questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Okay, do any of my other board members have any questions for Dr. Martin before she feels released? Oh, yes, you are. We'll elevate you.
Thank you. I think Dr. Boyd is going to talk to me.
Battlefield promotion.
Okay, thank you very kindly.
Thank you.
That's Grover, I think.
Ms. Stigler, let me ask on this topic. So, I know we don't, I don't know if we can come to quiet resolution, but if on the board doing like a resolution to support it or something, if y'all kind of, and maybe just talk among, and we can figure out between now and February if the majority feel good about that. Obviously, we don't want to bring it if we don't want it voted down. That would not look good to the feds, but if the majority feel good about moving forward with something, I would love to do that. And we probably would just do a resolution that would say, whereas the department's developed this, these are the goals in it, it aligns with Alabama Achieves, aligns with long-term, objectives of the board to raise student achievement in the state, and therefore the board, supports this effort or something like that. So.
Or 6 o'clock.
The only way I know is if they start talking. When I change their name, I just go.
Okay.
Got it. So, just between now and then, if y'all let me know kind of how you feel about that, we don't have to do it today. And the other thing, on that, not on that issue, but just, I know, I think we still have Dr. Chestnut and Miss McCrae with us, so they are with us too, and I don't know. So.
I was going to take this opportunity to welcome our 2 newest board members to start joining us either virtually or in person next month. And we just wanted to say thank you for joining us virtually, and that we are just so excited about you being members with us, and that we will be on our best behavior maybe for 1 month, and then we will show you our true colors. But anyhow, we wanted to welcome you and just tell you we're excited, and I guess the premise will be that you will start receiving information and emails and all that, and I think you'll learn more about that tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. Yeah,
Tomorrow, yes.
Tomorrow during your orientation. So, anyhow, so we wanted to say welcome. Okay, progressing on, Agenda 1B, Dr. Mackey, I believe that's you, about CARES 2 funds and foundation.
Yes, ma'am, and I think we have a short PowerPoint to go with this. There it is. So some of you I know joined the superintendent's update last week. It's the same information.
Oh,
So
okay.
I won't belabor. There's a little bit of an update because I've had a meeting since then, but not much. But not everybody was able to join, so I wanted to make sure all the board members had seen it. So we did an update again last Wednesday with superintendents. That's it. So let's just go on. Just slide on up to the CARES fund. There we go. So, and I'm just going to quickly go through what happened in the spring and where we are now. So the first round of CARES money that the Congress passed, there were two buckets, okay, or two pots of money that went through the U.S. Department of Education. And there was one that went through the Department of the Treasury, but we got money out of it. So you see that. I think do you have this in your packet too?
I don't know.
I'm not sure if you do.
If we don't, could we get?
Absolutely, we'll get you copies. We can get them today. We can go ahead and get them today. Yes. You will? Thank you. So, but on the screen at least you can see, so year one, that was the money that went to the governor. The governor gave all of that money, 100% to K-12 schools. I'll have to tell you, I cannot find another state where that happened. So we're pleased to get that money. It was targeted toward buying devices, mobile Wi-Fi, particularly mobile Wi-Fi on buses, but some used it for other things, and before and after school tutoring and extra support. The middle bucket, the CRF money, is what came through the Department of Treasury. It was much more difficult to spend. That was the money that had to be spent by December 31st. Congress extended the deadline to December 31st, 2021, but that doesn't matter for us because we'd already spent all our money. So there are three pots there, $70 million that went to health and wellness and to support that. So that was paying for nurses, for all kinds of things to support health and wellness, including the purchase of PPE. And $100 million for remote learning devices. And that's where most of the devices were paid for. Even if districts had ordered devices using their own money or state money or whatever, they could recode and change those devices over to this federal fund. So that's what most of them did. So almost all the devices that have been purchased since last March 1st were coded to this. And then $100 million for the ABC for Students program. So that went through ADECA, not through our department. That was about $60 million was spent in the first semester. But again, Congress extended that, the ability to spend that, and we have enough money to take those students through pretty much the rest of the school year. So that program's been extended. No new students can join, but students who were on it first semester, there's money to carry them through the second semester. Okay, round two came again Christmas week, where Congress said we're going to give you more money. So that piece in the middle, the CRF money, it doesn't exist in round two. They did not give that money. They didn't allow for those funds. But the other two, the GEAR fund and the ESSER fund, yes, we still have. So the GEAR money, $67 million. So if you look at that, it looks like, well, we got a big boost in that. But of that, 45.5 million must go to non-public schools. And they have 6 months to claim the money. And then after 6 months, if it's not claimed, it's my understanding, I'm looking at Ms. Marty to give it, it's our understanding between her and Angie, one of them will probably nod yes and one no, but that money becomes regular GEAR money and can be spent by public schools, whatever is not claimed by the non-public schools. But we don't know for sure.
Right.
We actually have a call at 3 o'clock with the U.S. Department of Ed on the rules on this money. So at 3, if you see everybody in the room except me and the board members get up and leave, that's because they all are going to that call.
Yes.
And we think we'll get a lot more guidance today on that. This is causing a lot of heartburn and consternation across the country, because what happens probably is, well, we know the money cannot just be transferred to private schools, so they can't have federal money. So what happens is we purchase things on their behalf. And this is also a competitive grant. So it's not like all the private schools get money and they get so much per child. They have to write grants for what they want to spend the money on. And we have to judge the grants and decide which private schools get money and which ones don't.
And then the local LEA
Has to administer the grant.
has to provide all the administration?
Yes, ma'am.
But
Is
is
there
there
funded financially?
Yeah.
They get, so 5% of this 45 million can be held back for administrative oversight. But when you do that per LEA, it's not a lot. And so, and a portion, I think, now I was on a call yesterday that they were not all on with the other state chiefs, and we talked about this, so I'm probably saying some things they haven't heard. It'll be nice to know if this is repeated later today. But what they told us yesterday is that part of the grant procedure will have to be how many children in poverty go to that private school. So the intention is that private schools that have a lot of wealth will not get the money. It will go to private schools that take in a lot of children at risk and in poverty. But that's a lot of stuff that has to be worked out in really a pretty short amount of time, because the money has 6 months to be allocated. If it's not allocated, again, it's our understanding that it just becomes public school money. So I've had discussions with the head of the Private School Association. We've had multiple discussions about trying to coordinate this with his members. All the private schools in the state are not members of AISA though, so we'll have to get, some of them are members. Most of them are, even say the Catholic schools are members of AISA, so we'll coordinate. We know the diocese is interested, but there are some, and then there's a Christian Education Association too. And some schools are members of all three, and some are members of 2 of those organizations, or just one of them. And then we have some private schools that are not a member of an organization. But we'll widely publicize it and let people apply. But Ms. West hit it on the mark, because once the grant's awarded, then we essentially would pass that grant on to that local LEA, and they would have to administer the grant, including all the auditing requirements for the feds. So it's not going to be that easy. Private schools can also claim expenses on their application back to last March. So they're not just applying for things going forward. They can say, what we want is basically reimbursement for things we've already purchased. Yes, recouping costs. So we're working through it. We'll know a little more this afternoon, but that is the piece all the questions are around. The other pieces, so the SR2 funds, $899 million, about $810 million of which will go directly through to our schools, divided on essentially the Title I allocation, same allocation we used for the SR1 bucket. It does allow us to reserve about $89 million, 10%, for a statewide project. And I will tell you, we're working on what that will look like. Still waiting on some rules, but that's going to be primarily focused, I believe, on literacy, supporting literacy, math, early math particularly, and maybe some student wellness kind of things. But especially, so you can imagine things like summer school, things like letters. Like if we have more teachers, we can probably use this to train more teachers in letters, to do more professional development for early math, to support districts in helping kids catch up. So that's where we probably will target those funds. And we'll break that with our state monies to make sure that we we can cover a lot. So we think over the next couple of years, we'll be able to do some big projects if we do it wisely. We can only put some restrictions on the local funds, but we will put some restrictions on them. I mean, they can't, the things they can buy and the things they can't buy. But we're going to require them to do a recovery plan to get the funds. And just to think through, how much of this should I spend on improving my HVAC system versus how much should I spend on summer school for literacy and math? And how, if I'm already getting money from the state, from the legislative appropriation for summer school for literacy, can I use this money, for instance, to say we're going to go from 2 hours to 4 hours and provide lunch and kind of do almost an all-day program and do literacy in the morning, math in the afternoon. And so to help students really catch up. So they can braid these dollars with their state dollars and really make a big difference. The other two pieces that we don't know much about yet, the FCC broadband. So money was given to the FCC to expand broadband. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. We don't have any guidance yet. So money won't come to us, but some money will come to Alabama. It probably won't come through our department, but it'll probably go to ADECA, I would imagine, for grants to try to expand broadband. And then the pandemic EBT, that's the program where students, families that otherwise qualify for food aid, SNAP, can get additional aid because of the pandemic. And we did that this past year, but that is provided by DHR. I may say this wrong, but DHR provides the normal EBT cards, and this is just extra money. We did help with that because any child who's on free or reduced lunch automatically qualifies, and so we were able to work with DHR to make sure all our children were notified. And I have not, I've not had any discussion with DHR in the last 2 weeks about that. But, it's just an extension of the program, so I would imagine it'll move forward pretty easily. But I don't know. So that's an overview. Y'all want? So what are any other questions on that?
Is there a time limit on the ESSER 2?
Yes, the ESSER 2 funds are essentially a year out from ESSER 1, so September of 23. Is that right, Mr. Craig?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
September 23.
Thank you.
So they've got a good bit of time.
I don't remember, I think the superintendent may have asked on the call, as I was listening and taking notes, if any of the ESSER 2 money could be used to pay any type of additional teacher bonuses, stipends, that sort of thing.
Yes.
And because I know that they could use this money to extend possibly the school year if their local board shows, or maybe to have a more robust summer school. So could you maybe
I
answer
think
that?
so. I think, again, I keep looking at them to think, if I really do bad, just cut me off. So stipends and extended contracts, yes.
Okay.
So if they said we want to extend contracts, we're going to add 2 weeks to our school year, and we do have a couple of districts looking at extending their school year, they could use this fund to pay for those teachers' salaries and benefits.
Okay.
They could also do stipends for, like, if they wanted their teachers to come in and do Saturday school or after school, which are 2 other things we're talking about. They cannot do bonuses.
Okay.
So you can't just pay a bonus, say, you know what, we really appreciate all our teachers, we're giving everybody $1,000 out of this fund. So they can't just, they can pay additional money for additional work, but they can't just give a bonus.
And will we be helping them, us making our accounting department available to those superintendents that might have questions about planning? Because obviously they want to be really wise and not purchase something they can't sustain long-term in their budget. And at the same time, they may have some substantial capital needs, I'm just thinking of a couple of rural small districts in District 2 that have had some ongoing needs in their facilities. So will we be
allocate the whole thing to that? You know, that's I anticipate one of the questions we'll have. And I don't know the answer right now. I would suspect you would only allocate the portion of that associated with things that, you know, are mitigating the risk of spreading the virus, let's say. But just a full-fledged, I want to replace the HPA system and such, I would suspect, and I may be wrong, it's you know, we're still at the front end of this, and we'll implement and interpret along the way as we get additional guidance. But I would anticipate that something like that would only be partially applicable, assuming they met Ms. Martin's bar of how are you solving the learning gap. So it'd be that kind of a process. But certainly, I can tell you of one specific example of a school system that prior to the release of this money was contemplating a local warrant issue to finance certain things, and you know, and it not necessarily. They already had a pretty healthy debt load already, so they're a good candidate for doing just exactly what you're saying, kind of stepping back and rethinking, and maybe we shouldn't take this additional debt, maybe we can parlay that into more money over in the instructional area. So we're doing that kind of stuff. It's not a not knocking on your door kind of thing, but that's one that I know is probably going to change course because of the availability of this money.
Okay, thank you.
And wasn't
Dr.
there,
Mackey,
go ahead, Dr. Reynolds.
I know that this is new and the governor recognized that the new branch of the military, the Space Force Command, is reassigning itself from Colorado to Huntsville, Alabama. And I think in our planning, our long-range planning, to include whatever fund sources we have, we need to try to incorporate this new DoD effort into a statewide recognition in Alabama. I know the governor made some comment since the preliminary location for Space Force was in Colorado, why he would move it to a small place like Huntsville with no support system. I think somehow we need to take along with what the governor's already said and recognize this is a boom not just for my district, but for the entire state of Alabama, and see how we can redirect funds in future FYs to this whole issue of a whole new branch of the military being in Alabama.
Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's huge for us to get that command. And it will have statewide impacts. I agree with you on that. And hopefully will mean that young people who want to be, who are interested in space won't be moving off to places like Colorado or Goddard Center to do their work. They'll stay in Huntsville, which is what we've always wanted. So we have begun talking about that. We knew that Alabama was obviously a finalist, but I think we'll get deeper into that quickly. You know, we've got a good relationship with NASA, and I realize this is a military branch,
It's
not
the whole
NASA.
branch of the military. This is just not NASA. This is the whole branch of the military, which is going to grow over the next 6 years dramatically. And I think we need to not, we in Huntsville are not claiming it for ourselves. We're claiming it for the state of Alabama. And so the whole concept of what our community and our school system and our math and fine regards schools mean, because it's going to be a branch of the military equal to the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better.
I'm sort of mixing a little bit of information, and this sort of pulls in the vaccine, but of course it also entails CARES money. Thinking about extending the school year, HVACs, I've been reading more about bringing, is it ultraviolet rays that are supposed to be coming in to kill it, which would be good where you can get our kids back into the building quicker, and not only for just now, but for long term. And then when we start vaccinating our teachers, there's going to be a bit of an impact on their attendance. I mean, the way I'm understanding it, some of the vaccines cause being extremely tired for 2 or 3 days or whatever. So are we going to benefit from extending the school year or giving the teachers a break where they can sort of revitalize, revamp, recover, and then start a robust summer school? I mean, these are all things that are sort of
Oh, yes,
mulling
ma'am.
around in my brain.
Good question. So on the vaccine, we have encouraged superintendents, when we know vaccines are available, to look at maybe just closing school for a few days. To get, if they can get all of their teachers in, say, in one day, which is in a place like Mobile will be hard, but in some places like same area in Satsuma,
That's in
possible.
Carolina, right?
And then you could, but if you could do that, you just said, if we can get all of our teachers vaccinated on Wednesday and we just close Thursday and Friday, or when I say close, do remote learning anyway, they're doing so much in and out of that, and come back on Monday and just cover that, because we know we don't have substitutes. If even 10% of your teachers called in the next morning and said, I can't make it, that's a huge problem, certainly now. So that's one thing. Finishing the school year, so I'm going to say something I haven't said publicly yet, but we've had a lot of questions about spring break. And the superintendent's interested in, could we just go straight through, end early, and get out? Because for the one, they're worried about students where they might go for spring break and then come back, and having another spike. And two, it's just kind of, let's just plug through this year and put a bow on it and call it finished. So that's certainly something they have the option to do locally. I have been also encouraging folks to not really push, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, but not to push for starting summer school like the first week of June, to give teachers some time to go catch their breath, and then maybe look at coming back in July. And we do have a couple of school systems looking at extending next year, and they are talking about starting back in July, just taking June off and just letting it go. But then maybe July 9th, coming back and actually starting and having a 200-day year next year. What we kind of anticipate in our recovery plan is a multiple options. So it might be extended school year, targeted summer school, before or after school tutoring, Saturday school programs, and to help them think through which of these are right for my community, which ones are not right for my community, and how do I make an adjustment. So, and I'm sure this is mulling in your mind. I know it is as a principal. So when you talk about summer school or extended school year, it's different to say we're going to require this for 100% of our students, or we're going to target it to our students who can and who can need it, and whose parents are choosing to opt in. So, we have districts talking about doing both of those things, but I don't see us as a state saying, you know what, we're all going to go, we're all going to extend, we're going to make everybody do it, because there'll be pushback. There will be communities where that's not the right choice. But now's the time to be thinking about those things. And we're talking, I think we're not only talking about summer of 21, but summer of 22 and 23. And this money, of course, can be spent through the fall of 23, but because I'm not even sure summer of 21 what it's going to look like. And y'all know that. We don't know for sure that the vaccines, I mean, the best possible scenario now is getting all of our teachers vaccinated and immune by the end of May. And if anything goes wrong with that schedule, then we're at the end of June, or are we into July? So it may be that this summer kind of is a bust. I think it would be somewhat counterproductive. Be careful how I say this, but to say we're going to have summer school if we don't get the vaccines, then we're in the same situation we are now. If we're still having to do the 14-day quarantines and we're doing 6 feet apart, and then is it worth it to spend all your money paying your teachers to come in? I mean, it's like, let's get through that part, and when we can get back to more normal interactions with children, then what does it look like? And so that might mean that this summer school stuff we're talking about summer 22, running summer 21, unfortunately. I mean, hopefully not, but we just don't know right now when the vaccines are going to be widely available. And we
But Dr. Matthew, on the other hand, if we don't make plans to continue the school year and actually reinforce this school year because of the loss of COVID with the summer school program, we may be passing our students up another grade without really providing them the level of education. At least that's the impact I'm getting from a number of school administrators and parents in my area. They're concerned that this concept of virtual schools and alternate schedules does not provide the same level of instruction as the siblings have in other grade levels. And if we don't look at summer school as one way of ameliorating our deficiency that's been created by us and our adherents to COVID, we may be passing along a problem to the future.
Oh, no question about that. And so, and it looks different for primary children and secondary children. So, so for secondary students in particular, I'm using an example, let's say Algebra 1. I have somebody that's in Algebra 1 and they've maybe been partly remote and partly in person, and they were quarantined for a while, or their teacher was quarantined for a while, but they muddled through and they passed Algebra 1. Well, most parents are not going to want to make their child retake Algebra 1, but I think what they do want us to do is have a strong assessment so we can look and see what gaps in their development they may have, and then it might be a summer school program. It might be, we've had some real issues with online learning, but some of it has gone really well, and for those older kids, it might be getting them in an algebra program online that just retouches on not the whole Algebra 1 course, but integers and just the pieces that they didn't get, and get them caught up so they're ready to go to Algebra 2. And a lot of that, I think, could be going on this summer, no matter what the vaccine schedule looks like.
Perhaps we need to look at summer school as being a free program as a way to include it as an extension of the school year.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I agree.
I wonder if, this is just a wondering as you're talking, if there might need to be a focus on our part on our lowest performing schools. That maybe we take the, and I'm not punishing anybody or singling anybody out, but that 20% that consistently struggles, if maybe we should lead in that regard and helping them make those strong summer school plans, because we already know it's going to be much harder for them
Yes.
with their students. I mean, maybe just a thought.
No, I think
Especially those
absolutely.
that maybe didn't get their devices in a timely manner, and then they were not allowed to come back, and so, I mean, through no fault of their own.
Right.
Often,
Right.
you know, they were forced to delay. And I've got a question about vaccines. Is the vaccine completely voluntary? The teachers, the students. So like on your immunization card for for students, that blue card that our kids all did, would it be eventually on, is that our decision, is that the health department's decision?
So it is completely voluntary. For adults, let me deal with adults and children separately, so it's a little different. So for adults, we believe, Jason, we've had conversations on qualifier. Yeah, we believe that a local school board that wanted to could do a local policy requiring their teachers and adults to take it. We've not had any indication, and we've had this discussion with Sally Smith and Jane Harrell Williams, but no board has indicated they want to do that. But we think that is something employers, as an employer, they could do. Now, but I'm not saying anybody is going to do that. The State Department, State Board could definitely, we have no, like, we don't have a role to play in saying all of our teachers are going to take the vaccine, even all of our own employees. For students, that's a public health decision. So public health can, they determine, like, you have to have the polio vaccine. But that authority is given to them by the legislature. So when it backs right down to it, it would be up to the legislature to decide what we would do. And we do have, so we actually are I think we're in the top 3 for the strength of our vaccination requirement program. Like, a lot of states don't require vaccines, or our state law absolutely says you cannot go to school unless you've been vaccinated, or you have a legitimate waiver. So, and it's not, all that easy to get a waiver. So it could be added to that. I think that's possible, and I'm gonna get a little more complex. You know how I can go on too long, but so one of the issues that we don't know is, will it be an annual vaccine? And I hate to say that, but the science is still out, whether this will be like the measles vaccine. You take it, and once you're vaccinated, you're immune for life. Or will it be like the flu vaccine, and you have to take it every year? And there are none of those on those blue cards. So the ones that you have to take every year, like the flu, those are not required vaccinations. So I think if it became something like an annual vaccine, there's no way for public health to require everybody to take it, because you'd never get caught up. But if it's a kind of one and done thing that they eventually decide, children can do, then we're probably, just to be, transparent, it'll be 22 before there's any vaccine for children under 16 probably. It'll be, so we're a year away from that or more. So there's time to get more science in and make decisions like that. Like the fall of 22 or 23, we would not have the authority on our own, but working with public health and the legislature, say we wanted to make that a requirement for kindergarten, that before you came to school you'd be vaccinated. I'm not saying we would. That is a question, though, just like the measles vaccinations required. But it would not be any earlier probably than fall of 23. So there's time, I think, to get better science and get to that. I think I kind of answered, but
No, yeah, I just didn't know. I had not heard that question, so I'm just asking.
Good question.
I'm not taking a stand.
No, it's a good question. And of those counties where they've offered it, I can tell you the uptake of teachers is only about 50%. So even where they've offered vaccine to all of our teachers, it's only about 50%. And I mean, you have to have 70% to get what they call herd immunity, which is a great way to say it. But before you can get community-wide immunity, you need 70 to 90%. Some folks think it'll have to be 90%. So 50% protects some people, protects you if you got the vaccine, but it doesn't protect everybody else. Where if you get to 70 to 90%, probably it protects other people who've not been vaccinated too. So I am worried that not enough people will take it.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Dr. Mackey, back to visiting summer school, because I know you keep talking about it, because it does affect highly proficient school systems too. I know that there's always the concern about that lower 20%, but the upper 20% are sometimes where we make our money. And I hope that by the February meeting of the work session, there is a definitive plan between the State Department of Education and the legislature to approach summer school with a more definitive and assertive and supportive plan than we have in place. It's, as you very clearly state, this is a different world. Summer school will be a different function. And we've seen our school year longer in other towns than we have it now. To me, for my communities and the communities I serve, both highly proficient and those that are less proficient, may need an extended instructional year in support and we need, as an organizational group, the governmental group, to push that concept.
Right. Charles, while we're on this, let's go to that next slide, because this is the foundation program piece.
Can
Which-
I've been trying to get in, apparently, I have been muted again. This is Stephanie Bell. Before you proceed, I would like to finally get awarded just a few, but I hope that I'm unmuted now. There's a delay on the screen when I'm watching. But going back to the resolution regarding to the virtual school and the spring break, summer school discussion, I think that we need to think through that, because I know that parents will be asking the question, well, why are we doing this virtual schooling if it's not working? And there's a lot of time, as you know, and a lot of energy, as you well know, being dedicated to this, and I think that we need to be very careful about how we proceed and how we try to convince parents to include their students or require at the local level their students to attend the summer school or even school during any kind of spring break, even if it's in their best interest. But of course, I don't think anything virtual is anywhere close to what we can learn and teach at the local level in a classroom with a teacher. Which leads me to the next question. You've already sort of discussed it, but the issue regarding the vaccination and how you, quote, police whether someone has had it and how you handle those, because I'm hearing from teachers who are not ready to get the vaccination, even though they understand that it could be helpful, but at the same time, they have allergies and there are potential problems with the allergies. And so for that reason, I think they have good reason to be concerned. The same thing with students, because as you know, you mentioned that there's a great deal of unknown medically associated with this. And as we venture in, I think we need to have some kind of established policy regarding what we plan to do to help both teachers and students and others who work in our school settings, because it, as you know as well, it has become a very serious health issue in some areas in particular, and especially among certain aging populations, but even children are now, they're finding that they can be seriously impacted by COVID. But that's one statement that I'd like to make. I'd like to know how we plan to proceed. And a concern that I have, and it goes back to presenting this first to the superintendent, I don't even have your presentation in hand. I would hope that the board would receive information in the future before even, or at least right before the local superintendent. And I understand the importance of having local superintendents, especially with an issue regarding vaccinations and other issues dealing with ESSER funds, etc. But the board also needs to have that information, and that's who obviously we work for. But going back to that resolution regarding, that discussion, we need to have a resolution in hand before we actually put it on the agenda. And if you plan to submit a resolution to the board, I would hope that the board would want to discuss the actual resolution regarding ESSA or any other issue before the board actually votes on it, and not a week before in a packet that we may or may not receive in our email. And I will have to say, Worthington has done an excellent job in getting that to us. But again, I think that we need to be very careful about voting on items, especially ones where we've already made the submission, without having any type of resolution. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity. Apparently I was muted. I've tried to star 6 several times, but it finally won't go through, and I don't know if it had anything to do with whoever is handling that, and I do appreciate that. But no, ESSA is an issue that with those additions, those submissions, I wish we had had that discussion before, even if the board has not been included in this process. I think it's past time now to even vote to support it or not. And, but the other issue is certainly important, and I appreciate what Dr. Reynolds has, mentioned, and the other board members as well, in the discussion regarding COVID and that situation, which certainly is one that we need to put on our priority list at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bell.
Okay, on the teacher stabilization proposal, we've had some questions about this. I know I talked to y'all about this earlier, but this is putting it on paper. So what you see is the information we sent you several weeks ago about the enrollment data in this slide. So this is not new, I realize that. Mr. Craig's really good with spreadsheets. I am not really good with spreadsheets. I'm not even always good at reading them. So, but what you see is in like 2014-15, our enrollment, and so you go out to the far right column. This is what I want to draw your attention to. I think everybody knows, I mean, our youth population is in decline in the state. We've seen, it's not just our public schools, we've seen a number of private schools close in the last 4 or 5 years because there's just not enough students. And so the youth population is in decline. And so we know that we anticipated we might be down some, we might be up some. So last school year, 2019-20 was actually the first year in a long time we saw that begin to turn around. We had 1,500 more students than we had had the year prior, which we'd lost 4,400 students that year. So we were in a kind of a real downward spiral. That began to turn around. That's somewhat, you know, something maybe our schools can take some, I almost said blame, it's not really blame, take some of the credit for it, but part of that's just birth rates and people moving in and out of the state. But we do know in that year we had several private schools that closed and we picked up a lot of those children. So anyway, it began to go back up. So we didn't know this year with pre-COVID, are we looking at a trend? We're going to have another 1,500 year gain, 1,500 student gain, or 1,000 student gain, or we're going to go back to losing students like we had previous many years. But this year we lost 9,700 students. So the reason I mention that is we don't know next year when we reopen, will all 9,700 of those be there, or would our natural attrition have been maybe a loss of 1,000 and only 8,700 will come back? We just don't know for sure. But what we do know is that kindergarten number was way down. And if you'll look at kindergarten, you'll see, now it's down 5,000 students from where we were in 14-15. But we had been pretty stable in the 55 to 54,000 mark for a number of years, and then we went to 52,921. So my anticipation is that a lot of those students are, they're 5-year-olds that are just at home. You know, mom kept, and I don't blame them with all of what's going on in schools. The child's never been in school. Hey, I'm just going to keep my child home for another year. So when those children come back, will their parents want to put them in kindergarten, or will they want them to skip kindergarten and go to first grade? So that's an issue because kindergarten, of course, is not required. If you go across that bottom line, you see other grades lost students. Yes, we gained students in 7th grade, 8th grade, 10th, and 11th. Part of that is, they're hard to live with. And we think in those grades, some of that is that that we actually did have students doing the online learning. For older students, it's easier. And we know that people left private schools and said, look, I'll just come, you know, my point is I want to be at home. And so I'll just do this because it's free. And the economy may have had something to do with that. So some of those students we may lose next year because they may have come back and then after things change they might go back. We don't know. But in the end, next slide, if Charles will advance this there. Charles did an excellent job. Thank you.
Before you switch.
Yes.
Can I ask a
Hang
question
on.
on
Please
this?
do.
Just one quick thing.
Yeah, go back.
Do we any sense of pre-K enrollment? I know that if they added more pre-K classes, but if kindergarten is down, you would also think pre-K enrollment.
Yeah, I do.
You know, with that same logic that they would hold them at home because they're their little babies.
Yes.
But, and that's something we can look into. You
We'll
don't have
look
to
into
answer
that.
right
I
now.
don't know, I don't have the answer to that. We'll ask that. There's a pre-K waiting list, so it may not change as much, but that's a good question. I'm not certain.
Well, and then also, the children that may have stayed home this year,
Yeah.
when it would have been their kindergarten year, is it the local board policy, whether they come in next year, they're 6 years old, whether they go to kindergarten or whether they go to first grade? You know, is it age dependent or is it ability and assessment dependent on where they go?
It's on, no, it's not the local board. Only the legislature can control that. And there's been moves to require kindergarten for a number of years, but they've never made it out of the legislature. So a local board cannot say, you have to go to kindergarten before first grade.
Right, you don't know your colors, you don't know your
Right.
letters, so we think you should go to kindergarten. That meets your needs.
The local board
They
cannot do
counsel
that.
them, and they'll say, you are right, put them in kindergarten. I mean, they know what they want when they come in.
Yeah, you can talk to them about it, that's right, but the state law says that parents have the right to skip kindergarten if they want to.
So it's a
They-
parent choice.
Yes,
They bring in their 6-year-old and if they're adamant they want to first grade,
They could go back to
And
kindergarten,
they could go back to kindergarten.
okay. But, so they have a choice, it's a parent, okay.
parent choice.
So we have a potential for a huge bulge in kindergarten and first grade because
First grade.
pre-Ks will be flowing up into K,
Mhm.
and if our big group stays in K, then you've got this bulge that's gonna move along that grade level or first grade.
Right.
Yep, y'all see it exactly. So if we have that 55,000 that naturally enroll in kindergarten this year, and this 3,000 that come back, now all of a sudden we have 58,000 in kindergarten next year. Or they can all jump to first grade and we have a huge number in first grade. And our folks don't,
Yeah.
you know, and, I mean, they'll start doing pre-kindergarten enrollment probably in April, is that about right? But it's gonna be incumbent on our locals to really get out and beat the bushes and get these kids enrolled. And to try to, I mean, we do have a kindergarten assessment, so we can help parents decide what's best. I do think there will be another move in the legislature this year to require kindergarten. And it's been in there for several years. The holdup has been that the last two proposals have included not just a requirement for kindergarten, but also a change in the age. So right now it's September 1st, I think, it's 5 by September 1st. And so the proposal, the last two times had the same proposal, was to move that to December 31st, which means somebody they would enroll as a 4-year-old for really half their kindergarten year, they'd be 4 years old. And we've not taken an official position on that, but we have advised that can be really tough because kindergarten's not developmentally designed for 4-year-olds. Then that puts pressure on the 4K program that's run through early childhood because it's designed for 4-year-olds, but if the 4-year-olds are going to kindergarten, then that makes their program really a 3-year-old program. So that's where it has been held up in the past, and I don't know where the legislature will be this year, but I do think it'll come back for discussion. Those are
Dr.
good
Nessie,
questions.
I would point out that the idea of September 1 being a firm date has been under local review for a number of years. I had a child whose birthday is September 6th, and what they did was they actually did an assessment, an intellectual and performance assessment, and allowed him to start. And I've had parents who've actually enrolled their children in private kindergarten for a period of 4 to 6 weeks and then brought them into public kindergarten. So the issue of September 1 has been under evasive actions at local levels have taken and eliminated that date from its purpose for quite at least 20 years, I know.
They'll try to work the system. All right, thank you,
Dr.
Dr.
Mackey, Ms. Ziegler,
Ms. Bell, go ahead, we can hear you now.
yes, I just want to remind all of us that we, have a compulsory education law in Alabama, and that all children ages 6 to 17 must be educated in our state, whether it's public schools, and now first grade is required, and of course, the age has been lowered, but kindergarten, of course, is not required in Alabama at this point. So I think that as we look at it, whether it's homeschooling or whether it's private or whatever school in Alabama, you still have a compulsory education law, and you all know that, but when we have this discussion, I think we don't oversee pre-K. We have it in our schools, and yes, we know a lot about it, but as far as, and preparation courses, we certainly have a role in that, but overall, our responsibility starts with first grade, and that's, and from a standpoint of requirements under the law in Alabama. And you know that, but that's where we have to remain focused, and right now, we're doing a lot of it virtually, and a lot of people think that they're actually going to school virtually, which they are. And we have a lot to consider, and certainly, again, I stress that this needs to be our priority, even though we don't necessarily have control over everything that is being done, as it relates to what schools, locals are doing for compulsory, to meet the compulsory education requirements. But there are a lot of children, not only are they missing from our schools, but they're missing from other schools as well. And as we look at those state laws, we need to understand that, again, the state board has a role in that. And that's where our guidance needs to be a part of this whole process. Not everything needs to be delegated to the locals. And at this point, I think there are a lot of open questions we don't have answers to, and that's where the superintendent certainly has a role in trying to provide those answers, not only to the local superintendents, but to us as board members. And we certainly can provide feedback, but this discussion is extremely important. I don't have to say it for you to know it, because you know it. And it's a lot of what ifs, but there are parents who are educating their children right now at home for various reasons, and we all have read about those and know about them personally. And for that reason, we need to provide answers and not just, provide a discussion. But anyway, I get, and I know you do too, you get questions all the time. I can't answer those questions because I'm not being provided information. Some of them we don't know, and we will not know the answers until a lot of that happens. And again, it's local decision making that controls some of that. But there is a lot of that we can control, and we can have input, provide input at the state level.
Charles, if you go to the next slide, we can come back too, but I just want to show how these two work together. So, by the way, a lot of those students have come back. So we've picked up, I don't know, Andy, close to 2,000 or 3,000 of those 9,000 students have come back since October.
Oh, since October.
But a lot of them have enrolled in November and December. Not kindergarten. So those 3,000 are where we really have a question, But a lot of the older students have come back. Our local districts have done a good job. They've sent out, they have kind of, to use the old phrase, beat the bushes and found students, who just weren't in school and brought them back into school. So using the numbers from the first page, these are however many, 7 or 8 actual true school systems with their names off. If you see System A, what we're proposing to the legislature and the governor's finance staff. The System A in 2020, 2020 ADM. Now, you will talk about confusing one another. So, and I forget, I've got 2 new board members on it too. So when we talk about 2020 ADM, that is the 2019, fall of 2019 count. It's the 1920 school year. Okay, so yeah, you might want to make a note. So in the fall of 19, they had 8,203 students. In the fall of 2020, okay, so the 2021 they had 78,17 for a loss of 386, which is equivalent to about a $2.4 million loss. And so what we have proposed to the legislature is, let's create a one-time, one-year fund. It's about $100 million in the fund that will close that gap and give them that $2.4 million with the anticipation, first and foremost, of saving teachers' jobs, because we don't want those teachers to be laid off. And then secondly, if they have additional amounts, because they may see that their numbers, when they looked at their kindergarten enrollment, their numbers really are going to be down in kindergarten, that they're going to need, so they need to shift some of that and hire some more teachers in the intermediate grades or something. So they'd have some flexibility, but with the primary purpose of saving those teachers' jobs. It's $100 million of teachers' jobs that would go away if we don't get this. But the governor, her finance director, everybody in legislative leadership we've talked to has seemed very positive about providing that kind of stability for next year. Remember, it's not new money. It's additional money, but it's not new money, because it's money that, had there not been an enrollment decline, they would have earned anyway. So anyway, it seems to be moving, and you have to really look at those 2 charts together to kind of understand that. Now, we've not been public with what each district's getting. They can pretty much tell, because Mr. Craig gave them the number, the calculation, and they can look at what their red number is. They know that. They knew it before we did. They can do the calculation and figure out how much they're probably going to get. But we don't want to do a public spreadsheet before we get a little further along, like the governor rolls out her budget and the legislature does something. We get a little more, firmness in that.
And
So
Dr.
that's-
Mackey, did you say that, like, this is sort of a hold harmless? I think maybe that was.
Hold harmless, yes.
But for those schools that have shown growth, like I said, a few of mine, to my
Yes.
surprise, showed growth, which is great. But they will be recognized for that growth and receive more teacher units.
That's right. So what they would get, they get 2 things. So look at System F.
Okay.
They grew, not by much, but they grew by 1.15 students. So they would not get any money out of the stabilization allotment because they don't have a decrease.
Right.
But they're going to get 2 things. So first, they are going to get current unit allocation this year, within this next month, right? Probably within the next month. They're going to get current unit money for those students they grew. So they're going to get money this year, and they will get the full count next year. So those students will be on they'll be on their distribution next year, and they got compensation this year for current units. So,
Okay.
so they do really well. Well, they really don't have, I shouldn't say they do really well, they don't have a change. Where they do really well is because the growth systems were so much fewer this year, and the legislature put the same amount of money in the current unit line. So when you divide that amount by fewer kids, they got more money per teacher unit or per child. So they'll be fully taken care of.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That's a good
So
question.
that $6,271 per child in System A, that's the round number per student?
That's the current year per student amount in the foundation program, gross. Before, no taking out 10 meals or anything. It's total foundation program divided by students, 6,200 students, $6,271 per student.
Yeah, and it's gross. You said that.
Yeah.
I'm underlining that. So it's gross foundation program. So it includes the costs that go with that, not just the salaries for teachers, but the costs, foundation program costs that go with those units.
Well, I would anticipate the locals asking, I mean, that's the reason I ask, did it take out the 10 meals that they?
No, I mean, what we kind of looked at that is the 10 meals is fixed and it's already paid for, it's already contributed, so any incremental would be, would be at the gross rate.
Okay, are there any other questions from board members before we move on to item 2, which is board member questions? I asked that Andy Craig please be in here because we were receiving on the way up and yesterday or last night questions about the summer school. So can you there was a memo that came out and there's a lot of questions. Can you sort of address that? And was it a formula? Was it, how that, in other words, especially with how it had been based and what they are seeing as far as the needs, they're going to need more.
Yeah, Elizabeth can help with
Well,
that too.
Elizabeth-
This is
oh, sorry.
summer school for the Literacy Act.
Correct.
Particularly is what, right.
And the memo came out and now everybody's calling us.
Two of you can come up here if y'all want
I was
to.
about to say, you want me to, I know there's where's the best?
Either one,
No,
that chair
okay.
works really well. You're right under a mic there and everybody seems to be able to hear well.
So that money was, the money that was specifically, I think it was like 18,564, almost 19 million, that the legislators gave us to appropriate to the districts, and so for summer reading camps. And so based on the way the law's written, it is the full support, which they call their summer program in the law, the ASAP, that is to be fully funded. And then the other two, limited 1 and limited 2, it just says if whatever money's left will be per pupil allocation. So we used that almost 19 million, and when we looked at the data that they uploaded into Cavion, which were the number of students that were not proficient in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, and that goes to that initial entering, when they entered last year's data, which was not, they didn't take anything, and so when they entered their September data. So that is the data that we use. So if you had 300 kids that you reported for kindergarten, first, second, third grade, then we took that money and then they did a weight to make sure that they were fully funding first at whatever the per pupil is. I have that chart upstairs. Dr. Stritchick worked with Ethan and Andy and then to plug in those numbers. And then after that was fully funded based on those numbers. And of course, fully funded, it's impossible to know what that means. So that's why we set that definition, and we're using this, what the numbers that you entered for K through 3. And so then after that, the limited 1 and limited 2 were funded. And it expended every, almost 19 million. So, and we wanted it to get the allocation out so that they would know, because we know in January we are trying to figure out budget-wise, what do I need to do if I need to do a budget amendment for my federal funds, and there's so many funding things. So the goal was to let them know how much, and then, for instance, we know now that we will be sending them half, and then a third quarter, and then a fourth quarter. So we will follow up with them. We have a sheet that shows them each of the elementary schools and how much is actually allocated. And I will tell you this, so that it was laying it out and looking at everything. We have it in a chart for them per school. So we looked at, well, how do you know how to fund, how many teachers are, so what we looked at was the student-teacher ratio of 1 to 14. Now, does that mean they have to use that? No, but they will see, and at a minimum, say you only reported that you had 24 total students, we still did we looked at the funding for 4 teachers minimum, even if you only reported 24, because you have kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. Why 14? And that's just because when you look at the numbers and you look at what the research shows, And then you look at the funding, 14 was the number that with ADM, a lot, that kind of thing. So that, it shows them that in their individual school sheets that we will follow up with.
So you're hearing there's not enough money.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I also, I'm trying to read my scribbles, because as I was driving down, I'm trying to write at the same time, which is not always a safe thing to be doing. But I guess a concern that I've heard from more than one was, I think some of them, well, what I heard was that they were told by the department that they could use data from last year, mid-year last year, so January data, or they could use data from this fall. They could use a variety of assessments to determine. They could use different cut scores. They could use different criteria. And so what some of my schools, I think when they got the memo and they saw the amounts, some of them, I think, were horrified, or I'll say deeply distressed, because they believe they have more children that have reading problems than another school that got a whole lot more money, maybe with fewer students overall, and then they find out they used an assessment, set a higher bar, which would show that more of their students were below proficiency levels, therefore now they've got more money. You know what I mean? And so then I said, okay, you've given me a problem, how would you fix it? You know? And so they said more transparency, that, you know, they would like to know what the data, when they enter the data into Cavion, is that right? Into that they want to know what that data is going to be used for. That they would ask that the data for the students would all be from the same time frame. Because they said, like, their students in January last year were doing pretty well. So if you base it on that versus the fall, there's a big difference, yet they were coming in from both. So they would say set the same criteria for all districts. The cut scores should all be the same. The assessment should be uniform. Dates should be the same. And whatever we determine, that we need to set the proficiency level. Whatever that is, that's what you score, and then below that, you get funding for those students. So, I appreciate that you had a big ask in front of you, and that you're trying to get that out early so that they can plan and make budgets and hire people and all that. It's just like, it was a little bit overwhelming, the phone calls we started getting. So, it was, at first I thought, well, it's just one, but then it was more than one. So anyway, so I'm just sharing with you, and I don't know, Andy, if there's any money left to address some of those that maybe turned in last year January data, when maybe the student reading scores were better. If now, maybe they could turn in their fall data, and maybe that would allow them to qualify for more funds. I don't know if there's some room to maneuver to help out those schools.
We use their fall data from their first screener, because that is the most recent. So the first screener that they entered, because here's the thing, whatever they gave like in January or March before, some of our schools didn't even have assessments to give, because remember so all we did was look at those 6 that they could choose from, because they used one of those because they had to enter in Cavion, the name, the one that they used, and then their numbers, and that's what.
Well, Elizabeth, some of them are saying, and it could be just that we need to communicate better, but some of them believe that some schools did not use those approved assessments, that maybe they used some others that are not on the approved list. And so anyway, there's some consternation out there, and any way that we could communicate and clear that up, I think that would be helpful, because there seems to be some angst.
And I will say that we do, we can only take what they entered right now, because we were supposed to have Power School and the data analytics piece where we could pull it. And so that is another issue of, like, with the 3 times a year, you know, ideally, they would have never had to have done that, because we would just pull it from the data analytics, because it's said in there, and I just call it dumping it in there, but I know it's, but for this year, we had to set some parameters, and so, and I mean, I know Tracy spent hours on the phone with the different vendors so that we were fair but equal based on the assessment they gave, because every assessment had a different whatever.
Right.
So
That was-
they went with, for this year, what the assessment set, because we don't have anything, we'll run that linking study with ACAP this year, so that we will have either a common Lexile to utilize, so whichever you take, the Lexile is whatever. But we couldn't do any of that, and we wanted to make sure that we had something that aligned, so that we didn't spend $19 million back. And
Well, 2 questions, or
Mhm.
one's really a request. Could we send out another memo that explains the process and
Yes,
invites questions? I know Wayne, Dr. Reynolds is always about quality control, that says if you have concerns over how it was calculated for your school, please call us. But some way that they can reach out to us if they feel like that theirs wasn't calculated accurately or fairly. And then also, when will we get Power School on board?
there's no.
Power School is actually set to come on, the go live date is August 2nd. We actually shut down our iNow system starting June 18th of this year to start the migration, but the actual go live date is August 2nd.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, and we have finalized, we were waiting for the memo to go out first to then send them their individual schools, because it also depends not just on that number, but if you're a full support. So a lot of these districts where you see that, there is that additional weight of those students because
And see, they
they're
may
full
not know
support.
that, and so if you,
Yeah.
and, you know, maybe just, you know, explaining and communicating and inviting questions, I think might resolve a lot of the, like I say, a lot of the angst that they seem to be feeling.
And there will, we're looking right now at the, you said that about additional funding. We are looking to make sure, because we believe that there is some additional funding where we can push out, again, at a per pupil allocation that they could use for what the Literacy Act says, whether it's their intervention curricula. There are 3 different things in section 4 that it talks about, and so we were working on that the other day, so that will be coming soon as well. And we're putting a sheet together that will show them. I showed it to Dr. Boyd and Dr. Mackey the other night. On a 1-pager as an LEA, I can see how much I get and how it's calculated for the screener, for my local reading coaches, for my science and reading PD, for my, so because they're getting it in pieces, and that's just how it's been to have to at least get the money out. But annually, we would send them that out so they can see their total. So we're working on that too.
No, and I appreciate, and I appreciate, like I say, that you're getting it out to them for summer so they can plan, but then sometimes, of course,
Yeah.
you know, there's questions.
Do any of our other board members have any questions for Elizabeth before she runs?
Yes, Mrs. Ziegler, I just want to emphasize the need to, when you go before the legislature, to be more than just, we think it's fully funded, or we think this will provide the full funding. I think we need to be really careful about doing that. And then, of course, if we claim this will fully fund the program, and then after the fact we're asking for more, it certainly doesn't help our credibility, and I'm not, I think it's more of a programmatic problem. Sometimes when you talk to legislators, they will express frustration over the fact that there's not enough, how can I put it, they're not convinced that this will that we're completely accurate, whether it's information or especially when it comes to budget, we better be right, we better be exact. And of course, again, this is an unusual year, but it's happened in the past. And even with this year, I think as we go forward in this next session, we're going to have to be very careful about any requests and make sure that if we say something will be fully funded, or we think is not the word that we need to use. And I just want to offer that as a suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much. Do any of my other board members have any questions that they wish to have asked at this moment?
I don't know if we're taking a position on the effectiveness of the varying ways of delivering instruction to students, which is very scheduled, students going 2 days a week or virtual. I don't know how we're projecting to the legislature how the quality of services that's being provided might demand additional funding in order to bring it back to where we think it should have been had we not had this COVID interruption.
For me.
No,
Don't go.
well, I think it's
Okay,
just
I got another
Jimmy's
question.
comments,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
We talked to them. We'll have the first hearing, budget hearing on the 26th or 27th.
But Dr. Matthews, what is our position? Are we saying virtual equals what we did before? Are we saying going to school 2 days a week with virtual the others are equal to what we're going to be done before? And do we need, as the State Board of Education, the State Department of Education, to augment what has been delivered in order to equate it to what we used to, or what we wanted to deliver before the interruption with COVID?
Sure. Now, I have been very clear, in my opinion, that nothing replaces in-person instruction with a highly qualified teacher in a classroom with children. Y'all have heard me say that 50 times, and I still believe the same thing. Nothing replaces that. Where we have had to do virtual instruction, where we've had to do hybrid instruction because of social distancing, and those are things we have to do to get by. It means nothing, but it's not equivalent to a teacher, high qualified teacher in a classroom with students. I think there will always be that aspect of a teacher looking over a child's shoulder and evaluating what's going on with that child. And they can't, it's harder to do that by Zoom. And I've observed some Zoom classes, and look, we've got some teachers, they are killing themselves doing really good work, planning to try to do good remote classes, but still, if I can't look over your shoulder and watch you do the work, then I have a harder time evaluating where you are and helping you. So, no question, we're going to have gaps of instruction or gaps of learning.
Dr. Matthews,
We'll
how
have
do
to
we
make that.
translate what you just said, which is what we've been saying, into dollars and cost variances when we present it to the legislature? You know, it's nice to have ideas and say that, but how do we translate that into dollar amounts that it's going to cost the taxpayers and the legislature of Alabama in order to bring back what we've lost?
Yeah, and they'll obviously, the funding from the legislature, which they are very interested in, helping us with this, and the braiding with the $1 billion of federal funds that we have coming in, will help us, meet those challenges. But we've got to get, unfortunately, this year is going to be a hard year to kind of finish out, and then those teachers are going to have to take high quality assessment to know right where students are when they come back. I hope that we'll have our state assessment this year, though we don't know what participation will be like. we, hopefully can do some other things by the end of this year, but it just really depends on the vaccination schedule and whether we're have most of our students back in school in May, because it could be that we're looking at when students return to really get a good handle on where individual students are. Of course, it'll be individualized, which students are where. It progresses by the week. Very good point. I appreciate that.
I've got another question for Dr. Davis, if that's okay. Go for it. Just like yours, mine is as well thought as anybody's can be, the Literacy Act. And on page 17, it says that the State Board of Education shall approve a pre and post assessment for summer school. Is that for this summer? And do we need to start, getting information on an assessment that we would use this summer for those summer schools that are using Literacy Act funds to be in compliance with the Literacy Act?
And they all are receiving, funds for the Literacy Act based on they all have an elementary school, whether they're limited support or full, but that is, the pre and post are those 6 assessments that they're choosing one of.
But did we approve them?
That's from the state board. I don't want to say this, we were talking about this
There's
the
two
other
pieces.
day. Sorry.
So between now and next year, so that's not for this summer.
Okay, so that's for
Summer of
next summer.
22.
Okay.
Spring of 22 is the first time any students will be retained. They will have so there are 2 things in there, and I may be confusing. I wish Dr. Stritchett were here with me.
Well, and she
We are working with, we're having to work with DRC to build our test, to build another reading test because of the Literacy Act. It's going to be very expensive, in the millions of dollars. But the law requires another test because they have to have a second option. If they don't get grade level on the state test, they have to have a second option to do that. And so that is in development. So we don't have that for you, but it will be well before summer, summer of 22.
And so, and they could use like the pre-test and the post-test would be the same, I guess.
Yeah.
So you would do a pre to see where they,
It would have to be. How do you get a pre and post? They don't-
On page 17, the pre and the post, because if I'm not mistaken, without looking at it, it's for K-3, because you administer it to all kids that go to the summer program. And so that's where one of those 6 on the vetted and approved list from the Literacy Task Force and Dr. Mackey is what fits page 17 as far as that
yeah,
assessment.
it's under the summer reading camps.
Mhm.
And then part 4, under the summer reading camp, says a State Board of Education approved reading assessment system shall be administered at the beginning and end of the summer reading camp to measure student progress. And so I just want to make sure, that we're on target and that we're doing our jobs.
Mhm.
And, and when that memo came out, and we got all that worry and whatever about that memo, then I started thinking, have we fulfilled our duties?
But would we not
In
vote
regards
on
to
that
this.
come spring of 22? Or maybe even fall?
Well, that was my but I could be in the wrong part of the law.
It is
So I
go, every time I look at it, I
There
see
is,
something different.
there is a new test that we'll have to develop that's required.
For the second option.
Yes. And so we actually are all moving forward with DRC already. We won't have the test for you to approve because it's not, that's just in
No,
development.
and that's fine, I just
But-
wanna make sure that
Yes.
we're fulfilling our role.
We're gonna dig deeply into that because y'all know better than I do. I don't wanna misspeak.
And then one last question.
Sure.
And at least from me, from reading, the reading specialist degree. I know that we added a lot to the undergraduate program, reading requirements, adding more classes, in the law too. But a reading specialist, did we talk about adding more like phonemic awareness and phonics and science of reading principles and content to that particular degree?
So a master's degree in reading specialist. I don't know about that.
I mean, just as a non-educator, I would assume that the reading specialist is the guru of all, that knows everything, could teach letters, But then I guess it occurred to me, how do I know that? Where's my assurance that, because I think we more targeted the undergrad,
And I don't even know how many universities.
We'll get the answer to
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know how many have it.
Yes.
I would imagine that that's something, just knowing Dr. Meyer, that she's already on top of.
Probably
But
so.
I don't know for sure where we are, the reading specialist. And we will, I know you, I don't know if you've got a question on it today or not, but I know you've got questions about where we are with now one's slipping my mind. Barksdale. But that's something they can also look at when they come
It's
in.
approved too,
We
yes.
never get that done.
Well, that was all.
No, actually,
Did they find
They were, and Jessica Sanders helped. But
Did they
yes,
finally get it? Did they finally sign off on it?
But they needed to, one more thing. and-
Yeah, they had not turned in all their paperwork to the state. People across the street wouldn't sign it.
She coming?
Well, and this
Dr.
is
Meyer.
one that you can, I'm fine with you getting back with me later. I just wanted to toss that out there because I had focused more on undergrad, and preparing them, and I really hadn't focused much on grad school.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought I heard her voice, but if she comes
She's-
in, we can.
she's coming.
She's coming?
I think so.
I think she may be on the phone. She may be trying to
there
get
she
an
is.
answer to the question.
Hey, on the mask.
I'm phoning a friend.
Sorry, I did not hear the question.
All right, Dr. Meyer, come on up here.
Yes.
So that
Hear
we
better.
can, you can hear better and everybody can hear you.
So the question, Dr. McCarty can go back, but basically those reading specialist program, we have a master's degree in reading specialists.
Yes.
And have we required them to also meet the criteria about science and reading and those things we're doing for our undergrad,
We have not.
elementary ed programs?
We have not. That was not in the Literacy Act, and they're not teaching children full-time. So we included it in the 3 programs for early childhood and elementary and collaborative teacher K-6, but we did not put it in the reading specialist.
Dr. Meyer, explain to me, as a non-educator, what does a reading specialist do?
Well, we used to have a certificate that was called reading teacher, and their primary responsibility was to work with children who were struggling readers. Then a decision was made that those programs were not the quality that some folks thought they should be. So the board rescinded approval of all those programs. They were closed down when Dr. Catherine Mitchell was here working with birthing ARI with Cheryl Parrish and Caroline Novak and so on. We built new standards for a reading specialist program. Their primary responsibility is to work with teachers who are actually teaching the children. They are to be a resource primarily to teachers. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't work sometimes with children who were really having serious reading problems, but they were primarily to be a resource. And at one point, there was talk about the folks that were hired as reading specialists through ARI and other things to hold that certificate. But a decision was subsequently made not to meet that requirement. So unfortunately, there are very few people doing the reading specialist certificate program. But they are prepared through their programs to be a resource to other teachers primarily. And some of the institutions have put that program on hold or inactive status because they didn't have very many students and so on. But we did not put the science of reading and the 9 hours and so on in that program. We could do that if you think that we should.
I just didn't even know
Yeah.
enough to say anything. So, I wasn't sure what
Yeah.
was there or what wasn't,
It's a-
and what their role in school.
It's a master's degree program. And most often, the folks that go into the program are from early childhood or elementary. And as you know, even before the Literacy Act, those were the teachers who had the most coursework in reading as part of their undergraduate program. And so the admission standards for that program say if they don't have a background in early childhood or elementary, then there are some additional admission requirements there to meet so that they begin at the same level, knowing about the teaching of reading.
Would we have a way fairly easily of knowing how many students are enrolled in those programs?
Oh, yes, we can find out in.
Could you send that to us?
Yes, ma'am. There's probably a half a dozen institutions now that have active programs. Not many.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry to go on that tangent, but I've always wondered, and then talking about science of reading and literacy act, I knew it wasn't part of the Literacy Act, but I just didn't know how it fit in with everything.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions for Dr. Meyer while we have her? I guess not. Thank you very kindly. All right, are there any other questions before we ask Dr. McCarty if there's any questions to be had? No, run.
Good time for you to go.
Yeah, run. Okay, Dr. McCarty, I'm sorry.
I want to see if our two new people have any questions, and they, just to see, I mean, I think we walk away with a question, not.
And of course, Dr. Chestnut and Mrs. McRae, if y'all have questions, you certainly may ask of them. We won't put you on the hot seat, but before Dr. McCarty ends, you might, a question may come up, and we certainly would honor any questions you may have. So think about it and let us know. Dr. McCarty?
PSAT, we talked about it.
Yep.
The numbers of the PSAT fell dramatically from over 22,000 students taking the PSAT in 2018 to 8,300 taking it in 2019. And as we talked about, it's the only way you can become National Merit Scholar is to have taken the PSAT. No matter if you make a 36 on the ACT, doesn't matter if you haven't taken the PSAT. And so I guess I was just concerned why, and pre-COVID, right, because it was 2018 and 2019, why those PSAT test takers, why the number plunged like it did, and if there is something that we need to do to address that.
I don't know if y'all can tell. I think that we offered it. There was a period when we offered to pay for it for every junior in the state. And as we had budget constraints between what we had to pay for assessments and what assessments were costing us, other assessments were becoming more costly. That just, we pay for it. We may pay for some if they request it, but it just became not a statewide program, I think. But probably need to get Maggie to verify that. I don't know. I was looking, nobody else seems to know for sure either. But I think that's what happened. I think it was pretty much a statewide effort for a while to try to get everybody to take it. They didn't have to, but more high schools offered it, and then when it was not, then, so it's about, I don't know the cost per child, I think it's about $80 per student.
Could we have,
But we can get that, we can find out about that, exactly what happened that year.
yeah, if you could look at what happened, and I'd love to know, like, I think we all like maps so much. I'd love to know the locations. I guess I'm concerned for the smaller, rural, more high poverty schools, that those children may not have the same opportunities as those who attend school in maybe a more affluent area. And just want to make sure that our children have opportunities, no matter where they live.
We can, I don't know how we get that. I'll find out. So PSAT is, of course, owned by the College Board. So the same as the SAT and the AP test. And they get, similar to ACT, when a student takes it, the information goes to the College Board, it doesn't come to the State Department of Education. So we would have to see what information the College Board had that they'd be willing to give us. They're really good to work with, and so I'm not saying they wouldn't give it, but it's not like we have, 10 students took it in this school and 5 took it in this school. College Board would have to develop that map for us and give it to us. So we just need to ask. I mean, I just don't know for sure. That's a good question, though.
They do a report for Alabama,
They
specific
do?
to Alabama, but I've never
I'm not
seen
sure if
a
they do
map.
it by high school.
Right, exactly.
They do a statewide
Exactly.
report. Now, you all know, I just got, like at 9 o'clock, I got copied on some emails, but evidently all of you got something from the College Board yesterday, pushing a program they do in South Carolina. And surprised nobody's asked about that, but I don't know. I mean, I got it literally, they didn't include me, and so I only got it because one of y'all sent it to me, and so I've sent it to Dr. Purcell. The reason it's related, because in that report, they talk about PSAT, SAT, AP classes, and the FAFSA. All of that is kind of continued. And what they do in South Carolina is the state government pays you to hit certain things. Like, so if you fill out the FAFSA, they'll give you a $500 scholarship. And if I noticed that one for sure. But you also get $1,000 for applying to college or something. And you can develop like a $3,500 scholarship if you do all of these things. But it's not run through their Department of Education, it's through their higher ed department. So I've sent that to Dr. Purcell and asked him, do they know anything about it? Do they have colleagues in South Carolina? They can set up a call with us. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll know more. And I know that you're thinking, well, he's going off a tangent, but that would be, PSAT is a part of that. So we'll include that as a part, trying to find out what other states do, especially if they're more tied to the College Board. So if you're a state that does SAT instead of ACT, then you have a much closer tie with the College Board. We have a good relationship with them, but most of ours is through our AP program, since we don't give the SAT widely. So we'll ask about that. Good question.
Okay. And the, dealing with teacher shortages. I heard about a program in West Alabama, Troops to Teachers.
Yeah.
That sounds like a phenomenal program, but when I asked a little bit more about it, found out that's the only location where it's promoted in West Alabama, and apparently they don't have any more funding. And so, especially like this, space station coming in Huntsville, and you think, we've got so many retired military in this state, can we not promote that more?
So Troops to Teachers, Dr. Meyer, you may, I don't
Yes,
know.
sir, I'm listening.
I mean, so Troops to Teachers is statewide, it's nationwide.
Okay.
They can go to any college, they can get, if they're, have a certain status, having spent so many years in the military, it's kind of like the GI Bill, they can go back to school and become a teacher, and the government will pay a significant portion. Stillman College just has the distinction, so like there's one college in each state that's like the headquarters.
Okay.
And the Department of Defense chose Stillman College, not us, and gave them the grant to do it. They did have a couple of full-time people who were supposed to be going around the state recruiting retired military, like talking to people as they turn in their retirement papers and encouraging them to do Troops for Teachers. I know that they had a lot of staff turnover, like 3 directors in a year. And I don't know if they have a director now or not. Do you know, Dr. Meyer?
I don't know about Stillman, but we used to have a staff person in this department who was funded to do that. Worked with Deborah Gaucher in our recruitment and placement office, and met with troops transitioning out of the service all over the state, especially Maxwell and Gunter and so on. That office was moved to Atlanta and then to Louisiana someplace, and we were deemed not to deserve staff person in this department, it was very helpful when we had it. And we would get folks into the alternative master's programs if they already had a bachelor's degree and so on. But Washington changed the funding formula and where the offices should be and so on. But we would like very much to have a person here with us working with that. This Stillman, as Dr. Mackey indicated, was funded for a while. I don't know whether they still are or not. But we would like to be able to attract the military.
Is that federal funding?
Yes,
funding,
federal
yes.
funding.
The Department of Defense pays for troops to teachers.
Yes.
They pay for the scholarships and they pay for the recruiting office.
What did you say?
The Department of Defense.
Yes.
They do, it's a DOD program. And I don't know, I mean, Stillman was, so there was Derwin, for those
Yes.
you may have known, Derwin was there for a while. He was in charge of troops to teachers, and we had some conversations with him about they were wanting to try to, revamp their recruiting principles and all. And then he left Stillman and went to, he's with a foundation in Sumter County now, I think. And then they appointed somebody else, because I remember seeing, okay, this is going to be the new person. And then it just kind of, like, I have not heard anything from them since pre-COVID. And so we'll,
Which is such a
Just need to-
rich idea,
yeah.
and we have, we've got a problem, right? We've got teacher shortages, we've got a large military presence. Seems like, can we not, bring them together and?
yeah, and troops can do it without going through Stillman. I mean, if you're retiring from the military and you want to become a teacher, they can go online and apply and they can get the scholarship. It's just what they were doing, what that institute that DOD funded at Stillman was to go out and recruit people as they were leaving the military to do troops to teachers. So,
Could part of the $1 million be spent on that? The $1 million that was the recruiting teacher campaign, $1 million, be targeted to that?
now it couldn't be put on that, but it could be,
Or a part of it?
but
It's like I see, capable people that many retire from the military at a young age.
Yes.
And they're disciplined, they're, all the wonderful things about the military, and it just seems like a rich, recruiting.
Well, I mean, I can only speak about what I know. Auburn has a really big presence through their veterans services on campus. And so when military are coming out of service, they can go there for counseling first. And then they would go out into their individual colleges. And so I don't know that they are in veteran services recruiting for the College of Education maybe as hard as they might College of Engineering, College of Aerospace, College of Veterinary Medicine. Department of Defense has a huge push right now for nurses. And so many, what we call in the Army green to gold, they might be coming out with enlisted and wanting to finish their degree or get a master's. And when they do, they become gold or officer. And so they're recruiting heavily into the medical field right now, obviously because of COVID and many other needs that we have around the world. So I think that the College of Education, unfortunately, is competing for those folks, and if they're not being funneled to the College of Education, they're probably not even knowing that we have a huge shortage. So I think it has to flow both ways. And I have no idea what other university campuses. I'm sure Alabama's got a veterans services department, and I would imagine all large universities do.
and we'll find out troops to teachers. I mean, I think our person at Stillman College, pretty small school, should be able to help us identify somebody who's over there.
Yeah.
And we'll see where they are and what they do.
I mean, it's a tiny size,
But maybe if the veteran services knew we want them,
right, we need them.
that they may be able to send some students over to college education.
Okay, good idea.
The last one was just an update on the website. When do we think?
Oh, good
Oh,
question.
website.
Done.
That is an excellent question.
Then you're done.
So, we may,
Wasn't you, in fact.
we may try to do, so, it's moving along. I don't have a target deadline for you, but I'll tell you where we are. I will brag on the two ladies. I'd like to bring them in. We might do that next month. So we have two ladies we've contracted with, young ladies, Del Morris and, what's the lady's name? Marie. They're really good. They have done more work since we canceled the contract with the previous vendor, or with the vendor, and decided to bring it in-house and we have these two ladies working through AUM, because the technology contract. They've done more in the month or so, 5 weeks we've had them, than we've gotten done in years. And it looks really good. So the front page is built out. They are building out the board member page now, in the superintendent's corner, and then we have designed the other sections and the pull downs and what the map looks like. And then under this map, then each section's got like a page. So like instructional services will have multiple pages, because they'll have one for social studies and one for English language arts and one for arts. So the design is pretty well built out now, and we even talked about giving you a little mock-up today, but one of those ladies had pretty extensive surgery over the Christmas holidays. In fact, she was in the office last week. We meet now every Tuesday morning. They come meet with me to do updates on it, but we skipped yesterday because we had a conflict. But she's actually on a walker now, and so we just thought, and she was out for some days, so we'd give them a little more time. But I think, I don't want to predict a timeline. I think it'll be this spring that we'll be able to get the new one up. And it is going to be, I know it's a long way, but you're going to enjoy it. In fact, last time we met, they showed me what it looks like on a mobile phone. And it will be mobile friendly. I mean, they can already show me that. We've moved, the big thing is we've moved from a proprietary software model. So the company that we work with in California, they have a proprietary software, and you can only, they have to do everything, and you can't fix something on it except very little tweaking. And that's where we kept, so, I'm sure they've got a lot of clients, and then we would get pushed to the back burner. And so we've gone now with, it's not open software, but it's a WordPress. Thanks, Anna. It's WordPress, which is very common. Like 60% of all websites are built in WordPress. And you can actually get on the internet and Google if you run into a problem with WordPress about how do I do this or that. And the WordPress folks are really good to work with. Most of the other state agencies' websites are done on WordPress, so there's easier work with other agencies on, working through problems if something looks askew. And so it's just a lot easier using WordPress than proprietary stuff. So it's, I know you want a deadline, but it is moving forward, and I think by next month we can give you a much closer, we can give you a view of it and also a better idea of when we can roll the whole thing out. We may, so we've had this discussion internally about whether we would want to roll it out incomplete. In other words, put the pages up that the public is most likely to want to go to and get those up in a new website. And then there would be some things that have value to maybe us and educators, but the public doesn't really search for. But keep that kind of live as as a website that you can go to behind a password until we could get everything over on the new website. So if we did that, we could obviously get it up a lot faster. But that means there would be some pages that would have dead links still. So we'd have to say, this link, this link's not built out. If you have a question, contact this person. And we don't want to do it when we still have 20 dead links, because that can be frustrating.
Dr. Reynolds?
Yes, Dr. Mackey, I'd like you to have a written report of where you are. I applaud you're trying to use WordPress and local staffing. I also hope that you'll include a page for each school system, so you can, I mean, the superintendents in my district change regularly, and people need to know, be able to go online and find who to talk to and contact. And if you have links that aren't complete, it's easy to go and post this site under construction. I just think we need to move forward and quit delaying, and I'd like a written report. I brought this up months ago, and I'm not saying you're not working hard, I'm saying it's not complete, and we need a more complete report of where we are.
Okay.
Easy enough. Elizabeth has a question.
Yeah,
She's
I
not even a
just-
board member, so.
I just have the general explanation that we will attach with each school, and I will forward it as, I just wanted to see, because if y'all have other questions, once you see this, and that's why it's still marked watermark draft. I'm sorry. And then Miss Nora can send it to the others, you're welcome. You're welcome. And it's got so this will go with each schools and their system, because we wanted the building administrators to know also, based on what their school is, instead of just, here's $20,000 for your LEA, so we're personalizing it.
Good idea. Thank you. Are there any other questions before we move on to item 3?
No.
Yes, I do have a question.
Ms. Bell?
Yes, regarding the webpage, I would like to have provided to the board the total amount that has been spent on this website for construction over a long period of time. Now, I would like to know a deadline so that there is an ending date, which most people know is included, usually it's included in the contract. But I would like to know, if you don't want it as a board member, just throw it away, but I'd like it also shared with us as board members. The total amount, not just for this one vendor, but the total amount, and even if it was not during your tenure, Dr. Mackey, the total amount that has been spent on this particular project and a cutoff time, just a deadline saying it has to be completed. That's not something that I would think would be disrupted too much by COVID. But anyway, thank you. That's all I needed to say.
Okay, thank you. That could be included with Blaine's report. All right, thank you. Okay, moving on to our agenda. I think we can, where am I?
We are. So item 3 is pretty simple. Faulkner University program. This is to approve a program. It's a Class A elementary ed program. And Dr. Meyer's still here, but I don't know of any major issues with this. I read through their report. It was a good review.
It's all good? Yes. Thank you. And then, of course, we're going to have National School Breakfast Week.
National School Breakfast Week.
With samples. With
Yeah,
samples.
well,
I don't know if you want
that might be some
Yeah, I was about to say, are you
apple
sure?
sticks. Then the employee of the quarter, that Dr. Boyd's been taking care of that. That we missed some quarters in there, that some of the people that were in charge left the department, and COVID hit us, but we recognized it. We're back to recognizing the employee of the quarter, and so Emily Hurst will be with us next board meeting somehow, maybe in person, or at least remotely. We'll figure that out, but we want to get back to the board recognizing the employee of the quarter, because it really does mean a lot to our employees here.
We love doing it.
It's very nice to do. Now, item 6, I know I usually get to the end and say, the rest of it we can kind of go. We can't just go, because item 6 is huge on specialized treatment centers, even though it's not a big presentation. But Dr. Boyd has been working really for a couple of years on improving the way we look at and deal with specialized treatment centers. And so I'm going to turn it just over to him and let him go through that. You have a copy of the underlying code changes, okay? And then he also has a presentation that's in your notebook and that we sent last night that'll kind of help you guide through this. but you've got the part we sent out last week, but then his PowerPoint will help, I think, help you better understand it. I'd say you better. He had a hard time getting me to understand it. Y'all probably will get it a lot faster. Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Dr. Mackey. Thank you, board members. It's good to be here. What I'd like to share with you is some issues and some possible solutions we have for our specialized treatment center. I think it's important for us to understand that we're dealing with a special population of students, and they're at probably their most vulnerable point in their lives. So it's important that we provide the best possible prescriptive services to them. So I'm going to share a few points with you, and Mr. Creel will slide over to the next slide here. Some general information about the STCs, or Specialized Treatment Centers. We have 61 STCs, and they're all over our state, and they provide this unique service to our students. Some of the funds are passed through local educational agencies or school district because some of the funds, particularly the special education funds, has to go directly through a school system before it can reach an STC, which sometimes create problems. There are 4 broad categories of STCs. One category is the treatment centers. These deal with students who have behavioral or drug issues. Then we have DYS, which is the Department of Youth Services. This particular facility actually has incarcerated students. We also have the youth detention facilities. We have 12 of them across the state. So the youth facilities exist because you may have a student who be involved in some type of crime over the weekend or during the weekday or so forth, and the district judge may assign that particular student to that place until that child receives a hearing. Or in some cases, you may have an event such as a child does a bomb threat, does something like that, and the judge decides to send that particular child or those children to that youth detention facility for a week or so. And then there's the specialized treatment hospitals. These are the students who have serious conditions. Some of it may be a physical condition, and some of it may be a mental condition. I think it's important to understand our schools and our STCs are sometimes a microcosm of our society. So when you have adults who may suffer from paranoid schizophrenia or things like that, that's not something they had. In many cases, it's not something that they had this at 30 years of age and had started school age. So we have to be able to educate these particular kids. And in many cases, our kids cannot, those particular children cannot adjust in a traditional school environment, even though we have a special education program. So the program itself, the STCs, it encompass a regular education program and a special education program. There are multiple placement entities, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. And also the funding comes from many sources, including the State Department of Education through our foundation program. So our next slide has the different pathways to the STCs. So if you look at the top, the 12 o'clock hour and the 2 o'clock hour, we have DHR, our Department of Human Resources, and judges. Approximately 80% of the referrals come from those two entities. And sometimes the entities work together. So DHR can make a placement by themselves, or a judge can do it by themselves, but in many cases they'll come together to talk about a student who may be under foster parent care and so forth and has done a particular crime. DHR contact person contacts the judge for that particular county or area, and they decide that the STC is the best location for them. At the bottom of the 5 o'clock hours, we have the multi-needs child committee. This is a component that we have here at the State Department of Education. It includes individuals who work in our special education department. And this comes about, we use this particular venue to give the students in the STC when a school district shares concerns with us here at the department. This particular committee comes together, there's about 10 people on this committee that talk about the best placement and the best location for that particular child. And then from time to time, we have placements directly from the LEAs. They feel that they are not properly equipped to meet the needs of that particular child, so they'll make a placement with an STC. And very, very few instances will have a parent who may feel frustrated with the public school system or private school and decide to send their child to the STC directly. But very, very small percentage at the parent level, small percentage of the LEA, medium size number of referrals at the multi-needs child committee, but by far the lion's share of it will come from DHR and judges, about 80%. Our next slide will talk about how complicated this whole process is. And here are the factors that contribute to why this is so complicated. So at the very top in that big oval, you have the regular education students and the special education. At one particular point, there was a belief that only special needs students attend or are placed at these STCs, and that's definitely not the case. I would say it's probably a 60-40 mix, so 60% regular ed students, 40% special ed. But I must say that the students who are in the regular education program, their time spent in an STC is much smaller. It could be a few days to a few weeks. But in some cases, if a student has a special education issue, that placement may be for a year or maybe for the entire K-12 span of that particular student. So that you have several, because you have so many different entities dealing with that, you have a lot of influencing factors. So the State Department, of course, we have a big influence because we provide a large portion of the funds to that. But our district judge and circuit judge, they have some input. Department of Human Resources, because they do many of the placements, they have some concerns and they would like certain things, see certain things a certain way. The mental health facilities, as I mentioned before, we have some students who suffer some serious mental health issues, schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, a lot of those types of issues there. Then, of course, local educational agencies and special interest groups, which include advocacy groups, special ed advocacy groups, and others. The funding sources comes from 4 major areas, and some include some philanthropic organizations that will sometimes provide funding to the STC. But ALSD by far is the largest IDA, which is special education, and that money goes only for STCs that have special needs students. And IDAs, of course, is Individuals Disability Education Act, and then DHR and mental health. So all of this coming together helps to make this issue complicated, but there is a solution, without question. It's going to take some time, but I must say that we're working through this solution with a really, really strong group of individuals who serve on a committee, their advisory committee, and as a matter of fact, we'll have a meeting with them on Tuesday, and we're going to talk about some of these issues. So we've had 3 meetings so far prior to COVID, and we're making some headway, but we're really ready to move on a fast track now to get this problem fixed. So let's talk about the proposed changes. As Dr. mentioned before, you have the actual administrative code, and it has underlying area and some proposed changes in it. The code itself is listed under 290-8-8, which provides the rules and regulations for all treatment centers across our state. Changes that we're proposing at this particular time is to eliminate the phrase where the center is physically located or where the facility is located. So at one particular point, or currently now, for funding to be received by an STC, it would be channeled through a school system that is the closest to that STC. Well, there's a problem with that, because in many cases, you might have a superintendent of a district that has 0 students in that STC. Yet we're asking them to give the money to the STC and to look over the STC if there are any issues. Well, dealing with any set of students, particularly these students, there are inherent liability issues that exist. That being said, if there were an issue to occur like that, that superintendent would have to work with his or her board attorney to get through that. So we're looking to propose that particular change. And instead of having the student, the LEA that's close to this, we would make sure that when a school district decides to send a student to an SDC, that student will still be retained on that school district's records, which is really, really good, because in some cases, when a school district places a student in an STC, it's almost as though that student's almost forgotten. Not necessarily the case, but you can see how that is the case there, out of sight, out of mind. But by enabling that student to stay on the roll of that particular school, it forces that school district to check periodically on those particular students and make sure that the well-being of that student is a primary concern. Also, the responsible LEA is required to ensure FAPE. FAPE is free and appropriate public education, so we want to make sure that we do not deny the student that, because that is the student's constitutional right. This is the federal law. So we want to make sure that that's being handled. Change the wording to read benefit all students instead of benefiting special needs students. As I stated before, there's this misunderstanding that this is only for special needs students. And the administrative code is somewhat written that way. So we want to change special education, special needs students to benefit all students who are part of that program. The last one is improve the readability of the section of the administrative code so that it's easy to understand.
Dr. Boyd?
Yes.
Quick question, just
Sure.
so and I may be completely off base, but the Talladega School of the Deaf and Blind, is that considered one? Like if I were Oxford City School and I had a student who was blind, could I recommend? I don't know, is that what we're talking about here?
Well,
I
there's
mean,
one,
is
there's
that-
just so many different, so.
Or is that one example?
It's one
of-
example, but like there are 4 broad categories of different types of schools. So you have schools that deal directly or only with behavioral type problems, some that deal only with drug type issues. You have some that deal only with special education students. So it's a plethora of different types of specialty schools, but there are 61. The big thing to understand is that these particular schools are specialty schools. So they focus on a particular area, in an area that a school district cannot address. And also the fact that in many cases, the student cannot adjust
Right, they
to
could
that particular
thrive
environment.
in that other
That's
environment.
right. And dealing with some of the individuals, it's just unbelievable, some of the stories that I've heard about how, some of these students, some of the things they do. Quick story that was told to me that this one particular student would collect mason jars and clean them up and have them really, really clean. And then this student would take part of his excrements, place it in a mason jar, and place it on a bookshelf in his room. I mean, just some really, really, really strange type of behavior. Again, when we think of our society itself, our schools, STCs are a microcosm of individuals that exist. Unfortunately, they represent an extremely small population. The most we may have in a year, we may have 5,000 students total in these particular schools, of these specialty schools. At one particular time, it may be 2,500. So when you look at it in the broad scheme of things, in a year's time, you have, if you look at 735,000 students, we have approximately 0.8%. So it's a very, very small segment of the student population. But nevertheless,
Requires so much
but it requires so
oversight.
much, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
when you're at the local school for disruption and you're not
Exactly,
giving them what
exactly,
they need.
exactly.
But they're our precious children.
They
Well,
are.
of course they
And so-
are, and this is why it's
Yeah.
the best location and
And this is why we have to support them, make sure we give them the best possible assistance that we can, because these kids, again, they're at their most vulnerable
and we
stage.
want
But
them to become
productive
Yeah.
members of our society one day, they can only do that under the right environment, working with the right people.
who actually goes in with their eyeballs to oversee these centers, to make sure that everything is on the up and up, the kids are safe. I'm assuming, is it residential? Some are, some aren't?
Some are residential and some are not, and not mistaken, that's an excellent question. One of the changes we want to do is we want to have a set of individuals, maybe retired state employees, to go out on a regular basis with a ruler or a scoring guide to visit, to make sure that the services are top notch.
There you go.
And we're doing what we're supposed to do, which will be part of the changes we recommend.
I like that.
So the benefits of the change, let's see, so integration of students into Power School. Power School is the big database system that we're going to have. It's the student management system. It holds all the student records and so forth. So instead of the students leaving Davis Elementary and going to this particular place here, that student will still be on the roll of Davis Elementary. So Davis Elementary will still be able to keep up with that particular student. And this is a situation. Sometimes these kids just leave the program, the STC, to the students with behavioral problems. Well, they don't go back to the school. They're actually truant. No one knows that that's the case in some cases here. So by having on the STC rolls, we'll be able to check the student's attendance on a regular basis. And if that student doesn't show up, then a truant officer from that local system, because that child is still on the local books, will be able to go out to check to see where that child is at. So this is going to be a huge improvement in that regard there. Also, one of the issues that we had before is that because the STCs were considered so different from a regular school, in many cases when the student tried to matriculate back into a regular school, there were issues of accepting the grades and all of this. Well, we're going to fix that particular problem because we'll have them on the road, but we'll have a set of instructional guidelines. So that student will be participating in learning, and he'll be taught, and he'll be able to transfer back to that particular school, because actually the teachers, because the students in power school, will be able to check the status of that student on a regular basis. So the last point is covered there because the LEA will have access to the student's progress. So going back to the instructional program, we're working with the committee. We looked at some different solutions there, but one of the possible solutions is the fact that some of the STCs may not have enough teachers or adequate teachers to do this, to teach the students to maybe have a type of hybrid type system where the students could actually learn using a computer, some pre-recorded asynchronous type of instruction, so they could actually learn their lesson and it will transfer back into their home school. As mentioned before, Ms. Egan asked a question, periodic checks. We want to be able to have a team of individuals to check periodically to make sure that the SDCs are doing what they're supposed to do. Matter of fact, we're providing them money, so there should be an exchange of services to those particular students, particularly if we're giving them money. So we, we'll be able to hold them accountable. And also we want to provide a clear understanding of who's responsible for providing a free and appropriate education for that student. So by having that student still on the records there and having the special education money transfer from that LEA to that STC, which makes perfect sense. Why are you getting the money for special needs students if you don't have that student there? And transferring to that STC will enable STCs to operate in a better fashion because now they will be able to give the money that they should be receiving to educate that child.
At these centers, do they have, besides academic, do they have therapists? Do they have nurses? Do they have,
That's a good question, and it depends. So it depends on which center. At one center, you may have teachers from the local school come in and work with the student. In another situation, you may have nurses there and doctors that visit on a regular basis because
and
the
do their
students
meds, right?
and giving them meds and so forth. I mean, sometimes you have students that are profound in their situation. In certain situations, you have. I mean, it just depends on the situation. It
But
sort of
the
depends.
availability of the services depend on the children that are enrolled for, I know they're enrolled under their local school, but actually at that center.
Exactly.
That
And keep in
may-
mind that each center has one, two, maybe three specialty areas. So you have one that does an exceptional job when students are addicted to drugs. You
Right.
have another one that deals with behavior issues and so
So
forth.
it's not the area, it is their needs depending upon where they go.
Exactly.
I understand that. Thank you. Thank
Could
you.
we have, again, like maps, could we see, I don't even know which ones are in my district.
Absolutely. So what I'll do is I'll do a heat map, something similar to Tableau, and I have one
I want red.
where they're located. Red. I'll have it for you. I'll have it for you. It should take about a week to get together.
Dr. Boyd, I know this is would be a huge long-term goal, but some of our STCs are actually accredited through Cognia, and they've gone through that accreditation process, and they actually do a beautiful job with children. Do you think that there could ever be a possibility, like a long-term goal, that all 61 of our STCs would have some type of educational accreditation? I think it's very important. Centers are very
Absolutely.
different, and those that are not accredited are very small, sometimes
Absolutely.
lack service.
And that's a good goal, and it's not a lofty goal, but it's a pretty big goal.
I know,
But
I
to
know.
achieve-
It could be a 5-year or 10-year.
Right, but to
You
achieve
know.
that, we have to start with baby steps, and one of those baby steps, and you made a good point there, not all STCs are created the same.
That's
I know
right.
the one that you're talking about,
Goes
does
through
an
a lot.
exception, yeah, they do an exceptional job, but not all of them are able to do that, for obvious reasons and so
And it's
forth.
not appropriate for some to have
Exactly.
accreditation in certain.
So by us doing the periodic checks and guiding them in the right direction would be a big step in the right direction. Plus, having a systematic instructional program for them to use will help considerably also.
Okay.
So yes, that will be our goal.
Well, I cannot tell you how pleased I am that you have made this a focus of your time. I think it's immensely important.
Well, I appreciate you brought some issues to us, and I appreciate the person you suggested on the committee. She's a big contributor, and we really
Okay.
appreciate her skill set, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Boyd. Are there any questions by our board members for Dr. Boyd? Thank you, Dr. Boyd, we most appreciate you. Dr. Matthew, are you at the end?
Yes, ma'am, that's the main thing. So that will come to you as code change, the code updates, next week, next month. And that's, that'll be, so it'll be proposed, and then you'll vote, basically you vote to advertise it, and then 2 meetings later, we can vote to put it, to make those changes in the rules. So it'll be open for public comment during that period.
All right, we wish again to thank Dr. Chestnut, Ms. McGray for joining us. We'll see you in your professional position next month. We just want to again thank you for joining us. And I have to say, I've been remiss, but I have to say, roll tide. Goodbye, everybody, and have a safe and wonderful evening. And those on the road, pray for our safe travels. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I don't have my gavel, so.
Roll Tide. That's good. I don't think AIDB actually is.
Yeah, I was
I
gonna
don't
say.
know.
They have their own board and their own line item in the budget, but I think Coosa Valley is.
Okay.